Hello and welcome back to this small series on building a very simple to-do extension for Pagekit. Up until now, we've been rendering our data using PHP templating. In this video, we'll change that by replacing the existing templating with Vue.js. Vue.js is a JavaScript framework for building interactive web interfaces. The basic idea here is to couple a view in the front end with the model from your backend. So in this case, the view is expressed as some HTML with so-called directives coming from Vue.js and some templating syntax, for example here outputting a simple message. You then write some JavaScript that couples the view with the model. We call this the view model. And the data that you see here can actually come from the backend, which is exactly what we'll be doing in our example. The cool thing about Vue.js is something called reactivity. In this example, you see that when I type something in the text field, the model changes in the background, and that causes also the other view, in this case the paragraph, to change. So let's get started. As you've seen, we will write some JavaScript, specifically the so-called view model. For that, I create a file called todo.js in a JavaScript folder. Now let's include that file in our PHP view. The first parameter here is an identifier we give our script. The second is the path to the JavaScript file. And lastly, the third parameter are any dependencies that we have. In this case, we want the Vue framework to be loaded before this file is included. We'll replace the existing markup with a container that we can bind the Vue model to. Let's create a new Vue instance, which represents our Vue model. We want to bind this to the to-do container. For that, we just type el for element and reference the to-do container from the markup. When we talk about a model, we mean the data that is used in our Vue instance. And this is just a list of to-do entries. In this case, I'll insert a dummy entry, and later we'll replace this with the actual entries coming from the backend. Another property that we will set here and that we'll use later in this example is the methods property. In here we can define any methods that we want to call from the view. Now let's create the same markup that we had before, but this time with Vue templating instead of PHP templating. We just had a list of items. And here we add our first Vue directive. Directives are just certain keywords that we can use to add functionality to this otherwise pure HTML template. So we iterate over all entries in our data, and then we output the message from the entry. For that we can use double curly braces. There are many other directives available in Vue. For example, we can bind the class attribute to a certain condition. This means that we can set the class to UK text muted whenever an entry is done. And because this is a very common use case, we can simply use the :class shorthand. Now, when I refresh the browser, unfortunately, we only see the pure HTML from the template. This is because I'm using the script asset manager provided by Pagekit, which loads this JavaScript file in the head section of our markup. So when our JavaScript is executed, the markup down here isn't available yet. To fix that, we simply wrap our JavaScript code in a document-ready callback. So when I refresh the browser now, we see the expected output. Now let's get the actual to-do entries from our backend. We can use another special property to pass to our Vue renderer. Remember, the special properties start with $. In this case, we pass data to our Vue renderer, which should be rendered as a JavaScript representation in the head section of our markup. So now, in our Vue model, we can reference the entries coming from our backend. And sure enough, when I refresh, we see our actual to-do items. As you can see, items that are completed are a bit lighter colored. Let's add a button to toggle the state of a to-do item. The label of this button also depends on the current state of the to-do entry. Let's add some more spacing to this list. But now if we click this button, nothing happens. Here we can use the add click property. Whenever someone clicks this button, we want to toggle the current to-do entry. And this is the time for us to write our first method here. We call it toggle, and this is a function that has one parameter, the current to-do entry. And we just toggle the done property. And that's everything we need to do. Vue takes care of automatically reacting to any model changes so that we don't manually have to update our Vue. Unfortunately, if we refresh our browser, we lose our changes. Let's make sure we can store our changes to the backend. For that, let's go to our controller and add a save action. This action receives an array of to-do entries. We can specify this with the request annotation above our method. And we can automatically check for CSRF tokens. Now, to store these entries, we fetch the config object for our to-do module, and we set the entries property to be the entries array that we've received via a request. And let's return a simple success message. Now let's create a save method in our JavaScript. For HTTP requests, we can use the Vue resource component. In this case, we want to send a post request to our newly created save action. As the payload for our request, we send the entries. We can access properties from our data directly on the this context. And as a third parameter, we pass in a callback function to be called onSuccess. Let's display some success message and add some simple error handling. Now to call this method, let's add a save button to our template. Again, whenever someone clicks on this button, we simply call the save method. Okay, apparently something went wrong. And as we see here, our save action is available as a route, but it's not mounted as an admin route. This is because the access annotation is only above this index action and not above our save action. Let's just move this annotation on top of our controller. We try again. And now it works. So when I refresh the browser, our changes are still available. So these are the basic ideas of using Vue.js inside a Pagekit extension. Of course, this example isn't done yet. As a next step, maybe you yourself want to add a text field where you can add new entries to this list and maybe even remove old entries. For that, I recommend you have a look at the guide on Vue.js.org. And I can highly recommend the Vue.js video series that you can find on laracast.com. For now, we've reached the end with this little to-do example. We've touched upon a lot of core principles of Pagekit extension development and of Pagekit itself. I've tidied up the source code a bit and uploaded it to GitHub. You can find a link down in the description below the video. I hope you can now get started and enjoy building things with Pagekit. Thanks for watching.